Imagine you're 22 years old. You were standing in a railway station in Lisbon, 1943. In your coat pocket is a folded envelope. You do not know exactly what is inside it. You have been told not to open it. You have also been told, very quietly, by a man with no name on his badge, that if someone tries to take it from you before you reach your contact in Madrid, you should destroy it. He did not explain what destroy it meant. He did not need to. Your train leaves in 11 minutes. This was not a scene from a spy novel. This happened thousands of times in both world wars. And the people carrying those envelopes were not, for the most part, trained intelligence officers or hardened soldiers. They were diplomats' assistants, journalists, minor clerks, a surprising number of women, and occasionally priests. Regular people handed extraordinary weight and told to look ordinary. Here's what almost nobody talks about when they discuss wartime intelligence: the actual movement of secrets, not the decoding of them at Bletchley Park, not the strategy sessions in Churchill's bunker. The part in between, the human link in a chain that if it broke anywhere could unravel months of work, expose a network, or cost lives on a battlefield hundreds of miles away. That gap in the story is worth filling in, because what those messengers experienced tells you something about how war actually functions and how much of modern history came down to a person on a train sweating through their shirt, trying to look like they were reading a newspaper. Let's back up to understand the problem that messengers were solving. By the time the First World War broke out in 1914, modern states had access to the telegraph. Fast, efficient, almost miraculous by the standards of the century before. The problem was that telegraph lines could be tapped, cables could be intercepted, codes could be broken, and in the Second World War, they were broken routinely by both sides. The Germans had Enigma, the British had their own ciphers, the Americans had theirs. Everyone was reading everyone else's mail, more or less, and everyone knew it. So for the most sensitive communications, the ones too dangerous to commit to any signal that could be intercepted, states returned to the oldest method available. They handed it to a person and said, "Get this there yourself." The official term was diplomatic courier. The unofficial reality was considerably messier. A diplomatic courier operating under the 1961 Vienna Convention had a kind of legal superpower. The bag they carried, the so-called diplomatic pouch, was technically inviolable. No customs agent could open it, no border guard could search it. It was sovereign territory in a coat. The courier themselves was also protected from arrest in most circumstances, in theory. In practice, during wartime, the rules bent. Couriers were followed, they were photographed, the contacts were identified. In neutral countries like Portugal, Switzerland, and Sweden, which hosted both Allied and Axis intelligence operations simultaneously, a courier walking through a hotel lobby might pass 3 people working for 3 different governments, all watching each other, none of them legally able to act. The watching was the point. If you couldn't take the bag, you could at least learn who received it. Now here is where the human element gets genuinely strange. The people selected as couriers were not chosen purely for bravery or physical capability. They were chosen for a specific quality that is much harder to manufacture: the ability to appear unremarkable. British intelligence, particularly SOE, the Special Operations Executive, developed something close to a science around this. They analyzed who got stopped at checkpoints and who passed through without incident. The data was counterintuitive. Large, physically intimidating men were stopped more often. People who were visibly nervous were stopped more often. But so interestingly were people who were visibly calm in a way that seemed practiced. Trained calm reads differently than natural calm. Guards, it turns out, were often quite good at detecting performance. The ideal courier, based on their assessments, was someone whose ordinariness was genuine, not performed. A middle-aged woman who actually was the sort of person who traveled frequently. A businessman who actually did have business in the city he was entering. The cover story worked best when it barely needed to be a cover story. This is why a significant number of Allied couriers were women. Not because women were considered expendable, though the history of how female operatives were treated is its own grim chapter, but because in occupied Europe, the movement of women between cities drew less attention than the movement of men of military age. A woman carrying a basket through a checkpoint was to a German soldier's pattern recognition just a woman carrying a basket. The Germans understood this too, eventually. By 1943, female couriers were being detained and searched at rates that alarmed Allied networks. The adaptation was to go younger. Teenagers, children in some cases, a 12-year-old in France who memorized a message instead of carrying it written, because a child with no paper cannot be caught with paper. The stress at this work was of a specific and unusual kind. Most people under threat have the option of doing something about it. Soldiers in combat can shoot back. They can run. They can take cover. The courier's job required the opposite response. The threat had to be absorbed in total stillness. Every instinct towards self-preservation had to be redirected into the maintenance of a calm, bored, slightly inconvenienced expression. There were documented cases of couriers making it through harrowing border crossings, delivering their material, and then collapsing. Not from injury, from the sudden release of hours of sustained suppression. One SOE operative described it in a debriefing as having held your breath for so long that when you finally exhale, you discover your hands were shaking the entire time and you simply did not notice. The psychological toll was cumulative. Unlike combat soldiers whose trauma had a recognized shape, couriers often struggled to explain what had been done to them. Nothing happened to them on the successful runs. That was the whole point. Nothing happening was the success condition. The terror was entirely internal. Several courier networks developed informal rituals to manage this. A specific cafe where the delivery had been made safely was always visited afterwards. A particular drink was ordered. The routine was a signal to the nervous system, it is over. The ordinary world is still here. You survived by becoming part of it, and you have. Now for the part that the official histories tend to underplay. Couriers were, on occasion, betrayed not by enemy intelligence, but by the bureaucracies they served. The networks that handled couriers were compartmentalized for security. Your handler knew your route, another officer knew your contact, a third knew the content of what you carried. The idea was that no single capture could unravel the whole chain. The problem was that this compartmentalization also meant that when conditions changed, the courier was sometimes the last to know. There were cases, documented after the war, where a courier was sent on a route that intelligence had already determined was compromised. The decision about whether to cancel the run was made above the courier's handler's clearance level. The handler was not informed. The courier walked into a situation that people in an office building in London already knew was dangerous and did not think to mention. This was not unique to one side. German courier networks suffered similar failures. The organizational logic of wartime intelligence created a structure in which the human being at the end of the chain was, paradoxically, the most exposed and the least informed. The couriers who survived were often the ones who developed their own instincts in defiance of their training, who slowed down when something felt wrong, who took an unplanned detour, who trusted a sense that the person waiting at the arranged spot was not the right person, even when they could not articulate why. Intuition dressed up as tradecraft. There's a particular story that sits at the intersection of all of this. In 1944, a courier working for a Polish government in exile network was crossing the Swiss-French border with documents related to troop movements. She was a former school teacher. She had been doing this for 14 months. At the checkpoint, the German guard asked her a routine question about her destination. She answered correct me. He asked a follow-up question that was slightly off the usual pattern. She answered that too. Then he asked to wait. She waited for 40 minutes. During those 40 minutes, the documents were in her coat. She could not destroy them without being seen. She could not run. She sat on a wooden bench and, by her own account in a post-war interview, thought about her students. Not about escape, not about the documents, about a particular student who was bad at mathematics and then suddenly wasn't. She thought about what had changed for him and whether she had been the reason. The card came back. There had been a paperwork issue with another traveler. She was waved through. She delivered the documents. She filed her report. She was given another assignment 3 days later. She never found out what was in the envelope. that's the part that lingers. Most couriers never knew what they were carrying. The compartmentalization that eventually got some of them killed also meant that the weight of what they moved through the world was invisible to them. They were asked to risk everything for information whose value they could not assess, whose consequences they would never see, in service of decisions they were not part of making. And yet, the records are full of them asking to go again. Not out of naivety, out of something harder to name. The sense, perhaps, that the work was real in a way that watching from the sidelines was not. After the war, many of them returned to ordinary lives. The school teacher went back to teaching. The businessman went back to business. The official histories were classified. The unofficial ones were rarely told because the people who lived them had agreed, formally or informally, not to tell them. The secrets they carried were eventually declassified, in most cases.
The experience of carrying them was not. And here is the question that stays with you when you dig into this. If the measure of courage is the risk taken relative to the information available to the person taking it, then these were among the bravest people of the 20th century. They accepted danger on the basis of pure trust. They never got to know if it was worth it. Does not knowing make it less meaningful or more?